Richard Bennett had built his fortune from nothing. At 42 years old, he owned one of the biggest tech companies in New York, lived in a penthouse that overlooked Central Park, and had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But if you asked him if he was happy, he wouldn't know how to answer that question anymore. The flight from Tokyo had landed 3 hours early. A typhoon warning had cut his business meeting short, and now Richard found himself standing in the marble lobby of his building at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. He normally wouldn't be home until Friday. His assistant had already rebooked everything, and he'd decided to just come home and catch up on work. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt longer than usual. He loosened his tie and thought about the stack of contracts waiting for him in his home office. Maybe coming home early wasn't such a bad thing after all. He could actually get some real work done without interruptions. When he opened the door to his penthouse, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The cleaning service came on Wednesdays. He'd completely forgotten about that. Maria, his housekeeper for the past 6 months, was probably somewhere in the apartment. He made a mental note to let her know he was home so he wouldn't startle her. Richard walked through the massive living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that an expensive interior designer had picked out. Everything looked perfect, like always. Not a single thing out of place. Sometimes he wondered if anyone actually lived here at all. He headed toward his office, already thinking about which contract to review first. But as he got closer, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Music. Someone was playing the violin, and they were playing it beautifully. His heart started beating faster. The sound was coming from his private study, a smaller room connected to his office where he kept his most personal belongings. Nobody was supposed to go in there. He'd made that clear to every housekeeper he'd ever hired. That room was off limits. Richard moved quietly down the hallway, the violin's melody getting louder with each step. He recognized the piece. It was Tchaikovsky, the same concerto his mother used to play when he was a child. The same one she'd performed at Carnegie Hall before she got sick. The same one he hadn't heard in 5 years, not since the day of her funeral. He reached the door, which was slightly open. His hand touched the dark wood and he pushed it slowly, careful not to make a sound. What he saw inside made him forget about being angry, forget about the rules, forget about everything. Maria stood near the window, completely lost in the music. Her eyes were closed and tears ran down her cheeks as her fingers moved across the strings of his mother's violin. The afternoon sunlight came through the window behind her, and for a moment Richard couldn't move. He just stood there and watched. She played with such feeling, such skill that it didn't seem possible. This was his housekeeper, the woman who cleaned his floors and organized his closets. But the way she played, the emotion in every note. This was someone who'd spent years mastering their craft. This wasn't just someone who knew how to play. This was an artist. Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. His chest tightened and his eyes got warm. The music brought back memories of his mother, of sitting in the audience and watching her perform, of feeling proud and safe and loved. All the feelings he'd buried when she died came rushing back. He didn't know how long he stood there. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. Time seemed to stop, but eventually Maria opened her eyes, and when she saw him standing in the doorway, the violin nearly fell from her hands. "Mr. Bennett." She grabbed the violin carefully and held it against her chest, her face going pale. "I am so sorry. I know I should not be in here. I was just cleaning and I saw the violin and I—" She was speaking quickly, her accent getting stronger with her panic. She placed the violin back in its case with shaking hands, being extremely gentle with it despite her nervousness. "I only wanted to make sure no dust was on it. I used the special cloth, very soft, and then I see how beautiful it is and I could not help myself. Please, I'm very sorry. It will never happen again. I understand if you want me to leave." Richard still hadn't said anything. He was still processing what he'd just witnessed. Maria was gathering her cleaning supplies from the corner of the room, moving fast, clearly expecting to be fired on the spot. "Wait," he finally said. His voice came out quieter than he'd intended. Maria froze. She looked at him with wide eyes like she was preparing for the worst. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The question seemed to surprise her. She'd probably expected him to yell at her or demand she leave immediately. Instead, he walked into the room and sat down in the leather chair by the bookshelf. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd started working for him 6 months ago. Maria stood there, still holding her cleaning supplies, not sure what to say. I studied music. A long time ago. In my country. Where are you from? Argentina, sir. Richard gestured to the other chair. Sit down, please. She hesitated, then slowly put down her supplies and sat on the edge of the chair, like she might need to jump up and run at any moment. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. That piece you were playing, Richard said, my mother used to play it. She was a violinist, a professional one. She performed all over the world before she got cancer. I am very sorry, Maria said softly. I did not know. No, it's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in years he felt something close to peace. I haven't heard that violin played since she died. I couldn't even look at it without feeling like someone was crushing my chest. But hearing you play just now, it was like she was in the room again. Maria's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them away quickly. You play at a very high level, Richard continued. That kind of skill doesn't come from casual lessons. You must have trained seriously, she nodded slowly. Yes, I went to conservatory in Buenos Aires. I had a scholarship. I was going to be a professional musician. What happened? The question hung in the air for a moment. Maria looked down at her hands, and Richard could see she was deciding whether to tell him the truth or give him some simple answer that would end the conversation. Finally, she looked up at him. Life happened, Mr. Bennett. Sometimes we have to make choices we do not want to make. Richard nodded. He understood that better than she probably realized. I'm not going to fire you, Maria, but I am going to ask you something. Would you tell me your story? The real one? Maria looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Maybe she was trying to figure out if he was serious or if this was some kind of test. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she took a deep breath and began to speak. My little brother got very sick 4 years ago. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she began her story. Richard sat across from her, giving her his full attention in a way he hadn't given anyone in years. My little brother Diego was 15 when the doctors found the tumor. Leukemia, they called it. A very rare type. In Argentina, the treatment was available, but it was expensive. More expensive than my entire family could afford, even if we sold everything we owned. She paused, taking a breath. Richard noticed she was gripping the armrest of the chair. My father works in construction. My mother cleans offices at night. We were never rich, but we were happy. We had enough. But this was different. The doctor said Diego needed treatment right away, or he would not survive more than a year. Richard felt a knot forming in his stomach. He'd never had to worry about money for medical care. He'd never had to worry about money for anything. The contrast between their lives was so stark it made him uncomfortable. I was 24 then, Maria continued. I was in my final year at the conservatory. I had already been accepted to join a professional orchestra in Buenos Aires. Everything I had worked for since I was 7 years old was finally happening. My teachers said I had a real future, that I could perform in concert halls around the world. She smiled sadly at the memory, but none of that mattered anymore. My baby brother was dying, so I made a choice. I told my family I would come to America to work. I heard that domestic workers here could make in 1 month what I would make in 6 months in Argentina. I could send money home for Diego's treatment. Your family let you do that? Richard asked. Let me? Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. They begged me not to go. My mother cried for days. Diego, he felt so guilty. He told me I should follow my dreams, that he did not want to be the reason I gave up everything. But what kind of sister would I be if I let him die when I could do something about it? Richard didn't have an answer for that. He thought about his own life, his own choices. Had he ever sacrificed anything real for someone else? So I came here on a work visa, Maria said. I found an agency that places domestic workers with families. The pay was good, much better than I expected. I started sending money home every month. Diego began his treatment. And the violin? Richard asked. You just stopped playing? Maria's eyes grew distant. I brought nothing with me from Argentina except 1 suitcase of clothes and my practice notebook. I could not afford to bring my violin on the plane. I sold it to help pay for my ticket here. For the first year, I did not touch an instrument. It hurt too much. It felt like losing a part of myself. She looked toward the window, watching the clouds move slowly across the sky. But then I started working for a family on the Upper East Side. They had a piano in their living room. One day when they were out, I sat down and played, just for a few minutes, and I realized something. The music did not leave me. It was still inside, waiting. After that, whenever I worked in a home with an instrument, I would play for a few minutes when I was alone, just to remember who I used to be, just to feel like myself again, even if only for a moment. Richard found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in her story. "How is your brother now?" "Better," Maria said, and her face lit up for the first time. "Much better. He finished his treatment 8 months ago. The doctors say he is in remission. He might be okay." "That's incredible." "Yes, but the treatment is not over. He needs checkups, medications, monitoring. It will continue for years, and there is always a chance the cancer comes back. So I must keep working, keep sending money home." They sat in silence for a moment. Richard thought about his massive penthouse, his private jet, his vacation homes he barely visited. He thought about how he'd made his fortune by being ruthless in business, by always putting profit first, by never letting emotions get in the way of a deal. "Why do you still play?" he asked. "If it hurts so much, why not just let it go?" Maria looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Because, Mr. Bennett, some things are part of who you are. You cannot just cut them out like a bad piece of fruit. The music is in my blood, in my bones. Not playing would be like not breathing. Yes, it hurts, but not playing hurts even more." Richard understood that feeling, though in a different way. After his divorce 3 years ago, he'd thrown himself into work even harder than before. People told him to take time off, to heal, to find hobbies. But work was who he was. Without it, he didn't know what he'd be. "I need to apologize," Richard said suddenly. Maria looked confused. "For what, sir? You've worked for me for 6 months. I know nothing about you except that you clean my apartment every Wednesday and Friday. I've never asked you a single personal question. I've never even asked if the job is okay, if the pay is fair, nothing. You're just invisible to me." "That is how it is supposed to be," Maria said quietly. "I am here to work, not to be seen." "No," Richard said firmly. "That's wrong. That's not how it should be at all." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Millions of people down there, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own dreams. He'd spent so long up here in his tower, disconnected from all of it. "I want to make you an offer," he said, turning back to face her. "I want you to practice here. On my mother's violin. Whenever you want." Maria's eyes went wide. "Sir, I could not." "Yes, you could. That violin has been sitting in its case for 5 years. Silent. My mother would have hated that. She always said instruments are meant to be played, not locked away like museum pieces. She would have loved knowing that someone with real talent was giving it a voice again. But I could not accept such a thing," Maria protested. "It is too valuable, too precious. It's just sitting there." Richard interrupted. "What good is it doing anyone? At least if you play it, it serves a purpose. It brings beauty into the world again." Maria stood up, shaking her head. "I do not understand why you would do this for me. You do not know me." "Maybe that's exactly why I should do it," Richard said. "Maybe I've spent too long only doing things that benefit me. Maybe it's time I did something just because it's the right thing to do." He could see Maria struggling with the decision. Pride and desire were fighting inside her, and he could tell which one usually won. "Just try it," he said. "Practice here a few times. If it feels wrong, you can stop. But I think you need this, and honestly, I think I need it too. This apartment has been too quiet for too long." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You are very kind, Mr. Bennett." "Richard," he said. "Just call me Richard." Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted in that penthouse. Richard started working from home more often, always on the days when Maria came to clean. He'd make sure to be in his office with the door open when she practiced in the study. The sound of the violin would drift through the apartment, and he'd find himself stopping whatever he was doing just to listen. He started noticing other things too. Maria always brought her lunch in a small container, usually just rice and beans. She wore the same 3 outfits in rotation. Always clean, but obviously old. Her shoes had been repaired multiple times. She was clearly sending every extra dollar back to Argentina. One evening, after she'd finished practicing, Richard knocked on the study door. "Do you have a minute?" Maria put the violin carefully back in its case. "Of course, I was thinking," Richard said, leaning against the doorframe. "You've been playing professionally level music. Have you ever thought about trying to perform again? Maybe audition for an orchestra here?" The look on Maria's face told him everything. It was the look of someone who'd buried a dream so deep they were afraid to even think about it anymore. "That life is not for me now," she said simply. "I made my choice." But what if it could be?" Richard asked. "What if there was a way?" Maria smiled sadly and picked up her cleaning supplies. "Mr. Bennett, Richard, you are very kind to let me play here. That is already more than I ever expected. Some dreams are not meant to come true, and that is okay. I have made peace with it." But as Richard watched her leave that evening, he realized something. He hadn't made peace with it at all. And for the first time in years, he felt a spark of something that felt almost like purpose. Richard couldn't stop thinking about Maria's story. It stayed with him during board meetings, during conference calls, even when he was trying to sleep at night. Here was someone with extraordinary talent, someone who'd given up everything for family, and she was scrubbing floors for a living while that gift went to waste. He'd built his entire fortune on recognizing potential and making things happen. Why should this be any different? On a Friday morning, Richard made a phone call. He'd met Jonathan Chen years ago at a charity gala. Jonathan conducted the New York Chamber Orchestra, one of the most respected musical groups in the city. They'd stayed in touch, mostly exchanging holiday cards and occasional emails about fundraising events. "Jonathan, it's Richard Bennett. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you say no." 2 hours later, they were having lunch at a quiet restaurant in Midtown. Richard explained the situation, carefully leaving out Maria's name at first. He talked about a talented violinist who'd been forced to give up music, someone who deserved a second chance. Jonathan listened, swirling his wine glass thoughtfully. "You're talking about an audition?" "Yes. Richard, we get hundreds of audition requests every year, most of them from people who've been playing continuously, who have recent performance experience, who have recordings and references." "I know," Richard said. "But this person is different. If you heard her play, you'd understand." "Her?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "So we're talking about someone specific, someone you know personally?" Richard hesitated. "She works for me. She's my housekeeper." Jonathan put down his wine glass. "Your housekeeper? I know how it sounds. But Jonathan, I'm telling you, when I heard her play, it was like listening to my mother again. She has something special, something real. And you're not letting your emotions cloud your judgment here. You're not trying to rescue someone because it makes you feel good." The question hit harder than Richard expected. Was that what this was? Some rich man's savior complex? He thought about it carefully before answering. "Maybe there's some of that," he admitted. "But I also know talent when I see it. I've built a company worth billions by betting on the right people. I'm betting on her." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, I'll give her an audition." "One audition." "But Richard, I need you to understand something. If she's not good enough, I can't help her. I won't compromise the orchestra's standards, not even for you." "I wouldn't want you to," Richard said. "Just give her a fair chance. That's all I'm asking." The hard part was telling Maria. Richard waited until the following Wednesday after she'd finished practicing. He knocked on the study door, his heart beating faster than it should. "Maria, can we talk?" She looked up from putting away the violin. "Of course, is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. Actually, something might be very right." He took a breath. "I've arranged an audition for you, with the New York Chamber Orchestra." Maria's face went pale. She sat down slowly on the chair, like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "What? Jonathan Chen, the conductor, he's agreed to hear you play, next Friday at 2 o'clock. But I cannot. I am not ready. I have not performed in front of anyone in 4 years. I have no recordings, no references, no—" "You have talent," Richard interrupted. "That's what matters." Maria shook her head, standing up quickly. "Don't, no, I cannot accept this. This is too much. You have already done too much by letting me practice here. Why not? Why can't you accept it?" "Because I do not want charity." The words came out louder than she probably intended. Her hands were shaking. "I do not want to be your project, your good deed that makes you feel better about yourself." Richard felt like he'd been slapped, maybe because there was some truth in what she was saying. "Is that what you think this is?" "I do not know what to think," Maria said, her voice breaking. "You are a billionaire. I clean your home. You can make things happen with one phone call that I could not make happen in a lifetime. It is not equal. It is not fair." "You're right," Richard said quietly. "It's not fair. None of it is fair. It's not fair that you had to give up your dreams to save your brother. It's not fair that I was born into privilege and you had to fight for everything. It's not fair that talent and hard work don't always get rewarded. But I'm offering you a chance to change that. Why won't you take it? Because what happens when I fail? Maria's eyes filled with tears. What happens when I go to this audition and I am not good enough? What happens when your friend realizes he wasted his time on a housekeeper who thought she could be a musician? What happens to me then? What happens if you succeed? Richard countered. What happens if you walk in there and remind yourself of who you really are? What happens if you get to play music for a living instead of cleaning houses? What happens if your brother gets better and you didn't have to give up everything for nothing? Maria wiped her eyes with her sleeve. You do not understand. When I left Argentina, I had to become someone else. I had to forget the girl who played violin and dreamed of concert halls. I had to become the person who sends money home every month, who works hard, who does not complain. If I let myself hope again, if I let myself dream again, and it does not work out, I do not know if I can survive that. Richard walked over and sat down across from her. I lost my mother 5 years ago. After she died, I locked that violin away because I couldn't stand to be reminded of what I'd lost. I threw myself into work because it was easier than feeling anything real. And you know what? I survived. But I wasn't living. He gestured around the study. This apartment, this life, all of this money, it doesn't mean anything if you're not using it to actually live. You taught me that. You playing that violin with your eyes closed and tears on your face. You reminded me that there are things that matter more than success and safety. But what if I fail? Maria whispered. Then you fail, Richard said. And the world keeps turning. But at least you tried. At least you gave yourself the chance. Isn't that better than spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Maria was quiet for a long time. Richard could see the war happening inside her. Fear fighting against hope. Practicality fighting against dreams. If I do this, she finally said, I need to do it the right way. I need to prepare properly. I have not performed for an audience in so long. My technique, it is not what it used to be. I can arrange lessons, Richard offered. The best teachers in the city. No, Maria said firmly. No more charity. If I do this, I do it with what I have. I will practice here if you still allow it. I will work as hard as I can, but I will not take more than that. Richard wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in her face. This was important to her, this sense of doing it on her own terms. Okay, but I'm coming with you to the audition. Why? Because you shouldn't have to do it alone. And because I want to be there when Jonathan realizes I was right about you. A small smile appeared on Maria's face, the first real one he'd seen from her. You have too much faith in me. Or maybe you don't have enough faith in yourself. Over the next 10 days, the penthouse was filled with music like never before. Maria came early on her workdays and stayed late. She practiced scales and exercises, worked through difficult passages over and over, played the full audition piece until Richard could hear it in his sleep. He watched her transform during those practice sessions. The nervous housekeeper disappeared and someone else emerged. Someone confident, focused, completely in command of her instrument. This was who she really was, Richard realized. Everything else was just a disguise she wore to survive. The night before the audition, Maria looked exhausted but determined. I am as ready as I will ever be, she said, carefully placing the violin back in its case. You're going to be amazing, Richard told her. Maybe, she said, or maybe I will embarrass both of us. Impossible. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why are you doing this, really? And please tell me the truth. Richard thought about all the possible answers, because he felt guilty about his privilege, because he wanted to fix something in his life, because helping her made him feel like his money had purpose. But in the end, he told her the simplest truth. Because when I heard you play, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like life could still surprise me, like there was still beauty in the world worth paying attention to. You gave me that gift without even knowing it. This is just me trying to return it, Maria nodded slowly. Okay, then let us see what happens tomorrow. As she left that evening, Richard stood at his window and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he actually cared about the outcome of something that had nothing to do with money. The morning of the audition, Maria called Richard at 7 in the morning. Her voice was shaking so badly he could barely understand her. I cannot do this. I am sorry. I cannot go. Richard was already awake, had been since 5. He'd barely slept thinking about the audition. Maria, take a breath. What's happening? I tried to practice this morning. My hands, they are shaking. I cannot even hold the bow properly. What if I freeze up there? What if I forget everything? What if— Stop, Richard said gently. Listen to me. You're having a panic attack. It's normal. Every performer gets nervous before an audition. I am not a performer anymore. That is the problem. I am just a housekeeper who is pretending to be something she is not. That's not true, and you know it. You've been practicing 10 hours a day for the past week. You know that piece inside and out. Your hands remember what to do even if your brain is scared right now. He could hear her breathing hard on the other end of the line. What if I disappoint you? Impossible, Richard said. You could walk in there and not play a single note, and I still wouldn't be disappointed in you. You're already brave just for showing up. That's more than most people ever do. There was a long silence. Then Maria said quietly, Will you really be there? You promise? I'll be in the front row. You won't be able to miss me. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I will try. Richard spent the rest of the morning unable to focus on anything. He had 3 meetings scheduled but canceled them all. His assistant asked if he was feeling all right. He told her he had something important to attend to, which was the truth even if she looked confused. In 5 years of working for him, he'd never canceled meetings for anything except emergencies. At 1:30, Richard pulled up to Maria's apartment building in Queens. She was waiting outside wearing a simple black dress that looked like it had been carefully pressed. She carried a small bag with the violin case strapped to her back. When she got in the car, he could see she'd been crying. You look perfect, he said. I look terrified, she replied. That too, but mostly perfect. The drive into Manhattan felt longer than usual. Maria sat silently, her hands gripping her knees. Richard wanted to say something encouraging, but he knew sometimes silence was better than empty words. When they pulled up to the concert hall, Maria stared at the building like it was a mountain she had to climb. I used to dream about places like this, she said. In Argentina, I would imagine myself walking through doors like those, carrying my violin, getting ready to perform. Today you get to live that dream. Or watch it die for real this time. Richard turned to look at her. Maria, whatever happens in there, you're already a success. You survived losing everything. You saved your brother's life. You kept your music alive even when you had every reason to let it go. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. This audition doesn't define you. You define you. Maria's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them away. If I cry now, my eyes will be red and puffy for the audition. Then cry after. I'll be here. They walked into the concert hall together. The lobby was grand with high ceilings and marble floors. Their footsteps echoed as they crossed to the information desk. A young woman looked up and smiled. Here for the auditions? Yes, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Name? Maria Rodriguez. The woman checked her list. Perfect. You're right on time. Go through those doors and wait in the green room. Maestro Chen will call you when he's ready. Maria turned to Richard, panic clear in her eyes. You cannot come with me? I'll be in the auditorium. I asked Jonathan if I could watch. He said yes, but only because I promised to sit quietly and not interfere. What if I cannot do this? Then you walk out and we go get ice cream and forget this ever happened. But Maria, you can do this. I know you can. She nodded, not looking convinced, and walked through the doors. Richard watched her go, then made his way to the auditorium. Jonathan was already there, sitting in the center of the second row with a notepad. He looked up when Richard entered. Your housekeeper better be as good as you say she is. I'm missing a rehearsal for this. She is. We'll see. Richard sat down in the front row, off to the side where Maria would be able to see him. The stage was empty, except for a single chair and a music stand. The lights were bright, almost harsh. He tried to imagine what it would feel like to walk out there knowing someone was judging every note you played. His stomach felt tight, and he wasn't even the one auditioning. After what felt like forever, a door at the side of the stage opened. Maria walked out and Richard's breath caught. She looked small up there under those lights carrying his mother's violin case. But she walked with her head up, her shoulders back. She'd found her courage somewhere between the lobby and the stage. She set down her bag, opened the case and lifted out the violin. Her hands were steady now. She checked the tuning, made a small adjustment, then looked out into the audience. Her eyes found Richard's, and he gave her a small nod. "You've got this. Whenever you're ready," Jonathan called out. Maria closed her eyes for a moment. Richard saw her take a deep breath. Then she lifted the violin to her shoulder, positioned the bow, and began to play. The first notes were tentative, careful. Richard felt his chest tighten. "Come on, Maria. Show them who you are." But then something changed. About 30 seconds into the piece, Maria's whole body relaxed. The music started flowing instead of being forced. Her eyes closed, and she began to move with the melody, the same way Richard had seen her play in his study. She wasn't on a stage anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere the music took her. Richard glanced at Jonathan. The conductor had put down his pen. He was leaning forward, completely focused. Maria played like her life depended on it. Every note was clear, every phrase full of emotion. When she reached the difficult passage in the middle, the part Richard had heard her practice hundreds of times, her fingers flew across the strings without hesitation. She made it look easy, natural, like the violin was just an extension of her body. Richard realized he had tears in his eyes. This was what she was meant to do. This was who she really was. Not someone who cleaned houses or took orders or made herself small. This was Maria, the artist, the musician, the woman who'd survived. Everything life threw at her and still had beauty to give to the world. The piece ended with a long, sustained note that seemed to hang in the air even after she'd lifted the bow from the strings. Maria opened her eyes slowly, like she was coming back from a dream. She looked at Jonathan, then at Richard, her expression somewhere between hope and fear. The auditorium was completely silent. Then Jonathan stood up. He walked down the aisle toward the stage, and Richard couldn't read his expression. Maria clutched the violin tighter, waiting. "That was remarkable," Jonathan said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Truly remarkable. Where did you say you studied?" "The National Conservatory in Buenos Aires," Maria said quietly. "And you haven't performed in 4 years?" "No, sir." That's... Jonathan shook his head. "That's almost impossible to believe. The technique, the musicality, the emotional depth. Most people who take 4 years off lose their edge. You sound like you've been playing professionally this whole time." Maria looked like she might faint. Richard stood up, ready to catch her if she fell. "I have an opening in the second violin section," Jonathan continued. "It's not a featured position, but it's a start. The pay is modest by New York standards, but it's enough to live on if you're careful. Would you be interested?" Maria's hand went to her mouth. "You are offering me a position? Now? You do not need to think about it?" "I know talent when I hear it," Jonathan said. "And you have it, raw, genuine talent. We'd be lucky to have you." Maria's voice broke. Yes, I would be very interested. Thank you. Thank you so much." Richard felt something break open in his chest. Relief, joy, pride, all mixed together. He watched Maria carefully place the violin back in its case with shaking hands, while Jonathan explained the rehearsal schedule and what she'd need to prepare. When they finally left the concert hall an hour later, Maria still looked like she was in shock. They got back in the car, and she just sat there staring at her hands. "I got the job," she said, like she needed to say it out loud to believe it. "You got the job. Richard, I do not know how to thank you. You changed my entire life." "No," Richard said firmly. "You changed your life. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and showed them what you could do. That was all you up there. Your talent, your hard work, your courage." Maria started crying then. Really crying. Not tears of sadness or fear this time, but relief. Years of holding everything together, of being strong, of not letting herself hope, all of it came pouring out. Richard didn't say anything. He just let her cry, understanding that sometimes you needed to release the pressure before you could move forward. When she finally stopped, she wiped her face and laughed. "I must look terrible. You look like someone who just got everything she deserved." "What do I do now?" Maria asked. The orchestra, the rehearsals, they start next week. I will need to quit my other jobs. I will need to find a way to manage the money. The pay Jonathan mentioned, it is less than what I make now with all my cleaning jobs combined. Richard had been thinking about this. Let me help with that, just until you get on your feet. No, Maria said. You have done enough, more than enough. I will figure it out. Maria. I mean it, she said firmly. You gave me the chance. That is the greatest gift anyone could give. The rest, I need to do myself. I need to know I can survive as a musician, that I can make this work on my own. Do you understand? Richard did understand. Pride mattered. Self-reliance mattered. He nodded. Okay, but if you ever need anything, I will know who to call, Maria finished. She smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. You are a good man, Richard Bennett, better than you give yourself credit for. As Richard drove her home, he realized something. He'd set out to help Maria find her dream again, but somewhere along the way, she'd helped him find something too. A purpose beyond profit. A connection beyond business. A reminder that the best things in life weren't the ones you could buy. 6 months passed like a dream Maria kept thinking she'd wake up from. Every morning, she'd get up and remind herself that this was real. She was a professional musician now. She played violin for the New York Chamber Orchestra. She walked into concert halls as a performer, not as someone cleaning up after the show. The first few weeks had been terrifying. Her fellow musicians were kind, but Maria felt like an imposter sitting among them. They'd all followed traditional paths, going from conservatory to internships to positions. They had connections, recordings, years of continuous performance. Maria had a 4-year gap and a story that sounded impossible. But the music didn't lie. When they played together, she belonged. The violin didn't care about her resume or where she came from. It only cared about the notes, and those she could deliver. The money was tight, exactly as tight as she'd expected. The orchestra salary was enough to cover her tiny studio apartment in Queens and basic expenses, with just enough left over to send something home to Argentina each month. It wasn't as much as before, and that worried her. Diego's medications were expensive, and there were still regular checkups. She'd stopped working for Richard, obviously. It would have been too strange to go back to cleaning his penthouse after everything that happened. But they stayed in touch. He'd text her before performances, simple messages like, break a leg or you've got this. Sometimes she'd see him in the audience, sitting quietly in the back, just there to support her. One evening after rehearsal, Maria's phone rang. It was her mother, which was unusual. They normally video called on Sundays, always at the same time. Maria's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Mama? What happened? Her mother's voice was strained. It's Diego. He collapsed at school today. The doctors, they ran tests. They found something in his blood work. Maria sat down on the sidewalk outside the concert hall, not caring about the cold concrete. What did they find? The cancer, mi amor. It is back. The words hit her like a truck. Maria couldn't breathe. She'd known this was possible. The doctors had warned them that leukemia could return. But knowing something is possible and having it actually happen are two completely different things. How bad is it? She managed to ask. They caught it early, thank God, but he needs treatment again. Stronger this time, more expensive. Her mother's voice cracked. Maria, I do not know what to do. We used all our savings last time. Your father is working extra shifts, but it is not enough. I am so sorry to tell you this. I know you finally have your dream, but... Stop, Maria said. Do not apologize. Family comes first. Always. I will figure something out. After she hung up, Maria sat on that sidewalk for over an hour. People walked past, some glancing at her curiously, but she didn't move. Her mind was racing through options, doing calculations she'd done 1,000 times before. She could quit the orchestra and go back to cleaning houses. The money was better, and she could probably line up enough clients within a week. But the thought of giving up music again so soon after getting it back felt like dying. Still, Diego was her brother. What choice did she have? She could ask Richard for a loan. He'd give it to her, she knew that. But the thought made her feel sick. She'd worked so hard to stand on her own feet, to prove she could make it as a musician without charity. Taking money from him felt like admitting defeat. She could find a second job, maybe teaching music lessons on the side. But when? The orchestra rehearsed 6 days a week, and they had performances almost every weekend. She was barely sleeping as it was. Maria went home that night and didn't sleep at all. She made spreadsheets, calculated numbers, looked at her bank account until the digits blurred together. No matter how she arranged it, the math didn't work. She couldn't make enough money as a musician to pay for Diego's treatment. The next morning, she wrote an email to Jonathan Chen, explaining that she needed to leave the orchestra for personal family reasons. Her finger hovered over the send button for 10 minutes. One click and it would be over. She'd go back to her old life, and this whole beautiful dream would become just a memory. She closed her laptop without sending it. She needed to think more. That afternoon, Richard texted her. "Haven't seen you at the coffee shop near the concert hall lately. Everything okay?" Maria stared at the message. She'd been avoiding that coffee shop specifically because she knew Richard sometimes worked there, and she didn't want to burden him with her problems. But maybe that was pride talking. Maybe sometimes asking for help wasn't weakness. She texted back. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you about something." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a quiet corner of the shop. Richard took one look at her face and said, "What's wrong?" Maria told him everything. About Diego, about the cancer returning, about the impossible choice she was facing. By the end, she was crying into her coffee cup, not caring that other people in the shop were staring. "I do not want to ask you for money," she said, "but I do not know what else to do. I cannot let my brother die. But giving up music again, I do not know if I am strong enough to survive that twice." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "What if there was a third option?" "What do you mean?" "What if you didn't have to choose between your music and your family? What if you could have both?" Maria shook her head. "That is not possible. The numbers do not work. Let me handle the medical expenses," Richard said. "All of them. Not as a loan. As a gift." "Richard, no. That is too much. I cannot." "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I've been thinking about something for months now. Your story, what you went through, what you sacrificed, it's not unique. There are probably thousands of talented artists out there who gave up their dreams because life got in the way, because they couldn't afford to pursue their passion and take care of their families at the same time." He leaned forward. "What if we started a foundation? Something that helps immigrant artists continue their work while supporting their families. Scholarships, grants, medical assistance, whatever they need. We could call it Second Chance Arts or something like that." Maria stared at him. "You want to start a foundation? I want to start it with you. You'd be the face of it, the director. You understand what these artists are going through because you lived it. I can provide the funding and the business structure. Together we could help people like you, people who deserve a chance but can't get one because the system isn't set up for them. But my brother would be the foundation's first recipient, and you'd keep your position with the orchestra. We'd make sure the foundation work fits around your rehearsal schedule." Maria couldn't speak. The idea was so big, so generous, so impossible sounding that her brain couldn't quite process it. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do all of this?" Richard smiled, a real smile that made him look younger. "Because 6 months ago I walked in on my housekeeper playing violin in my study, and it changed my entire life. Before that I was rich, but I was empty. I had everything and nothing at the same time. You showed me that there are things worth caring about beyond profit margins and stock prices. This is my way of making sure other people get the same chance you gave me. The chance I gave you, to remember what it feels like to be human," Richard said simply. "To care about something real. You gave me that gift. Let me pay it forward." Maria reached across the table and took his hand. "Okay, yes, let us do this together." Over the next 3 months, they built the foundation from the ground up. Richard handled the legal and financial side. Maria connected with immigrant artist communities, spreading the word, finding people who needed help. They rented a small office in Brooklyn and hired a staff of 3. Diego got the treatment he needed, the best doctors, the most advanced care. Maria's parents flew to New York to be with him during the hardest parts. Richard arranged for them to stay in a comfortable apartment near the hospital, refusing to let them pay for anything. On a warm spring evening, The New York Chamber Orchestra performed at Carnegie Hall. It was their biggest concert of the season, and Maria had a solo in one of the pieces. Her family sat in the third row, Diego between their parents, his head still bare from chemotherapy but his smile bright. Richard sat next to them, and in the row behind were 6 artists who'd received grants from their foundation, artists who could now pursue their dreams because someone gave them a chance. When Maria walked onto that famous stage, violin in hand, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a conservatory in Buenos Aires to cleaning apartments in Queens to this moment, standing in one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. She lifted her violin and began to play. The notes soared through the hall, each one carrying a piece of her story. The struggle, the sacrifice, the loss, the hope, and finally the joy. This was what music was supposed to be. Not just notes on a page, but life transformed into sound. When the concert ended and the audience rose to their feet in applause, Maria saw her family crying happy tears. She saw Richard clapping with genuine pride. She saw Jonathan Chen nodding at her with respect. After the performance backstage, Diego hugged her tight. "You made it, Hermana. You really made it." "We made it," Maria corrected him. "All of us together." Richard appeared with flowers, looking slightly embarrassed. "These are from all of us at the foundation. We're proud of you." Maria took the flowers and then pulled him into a hug, not caring that her stage makeup was smearing or that other musicians were watching. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for believing in me when I stopped believing in myself. Thank you for teaching me that the best investment isn't in companies or stocks," Richard replied. "It's in people, in their dreams, their talents, their potential. You taught me that." As they left Carnegie Hall that night, Maria walked with her family on one side and Richard on the other. The foundation had helped 20 artists in just 3 months. Diego was responding well to treatment. The orchestra was talking about promoting her to first violin next season. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still worries about money and health and the future. But Maria had learned something important. Dreams don't have to die just because life gets hard. Sometimes they just need to wait for the right moment. The right person, the right chance, and sometimes all it takes is one person walking into a room at exactly the right moment, hearing something beautiful, and deciding to do something about it. That simple act can change everything, not just for one person, but for everyone their story touches after. Maria looked up at the New York skyline, bright with possibility, and smiled. This was just the beginning.